let's get into the topic. What is this session about? As human beings will generally agree, there is a connection between behaviour and outcome in all areas of our lives, and this obviously is true when it comes to personal aspects, but it's even more true, if you will, when you look at the business aspects of our lives. And purchase to pay is a key example of this. It's almost a fine example of this because we put so many metrics around it. It's very, very easy to see quite instantly what the impact is of certain behaviour within purchase to pay. The question is, though, what are the behaviours that are getting the best results in purchase to pay? What is it that the top performing shared services organisations are doing that is getting them the good results? So we conducted a study, and here are the key findings. So you know the sample size involved in the study was 30 shared services organisations. From a general perspective, the journey that most of our members and our clients, and certainly the recipients involved in this study are on, is the following journey. They will be high volume organisations, 500,000, 1 million, 3 million invoices per annum coming in, 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 suppliers. They'll run off a big ERP. Now, if you take that profile of organisation and you look at a kind of a typical journey of all these organisations that are trying to get their cost per transaction down, their cost per invoice down, their payment on time rates nice and high, their first time match rates nice and high, move to electronic, and really move to a much more efficient and lean operation so that they can start turning into a value-adding organisation. The journey that they principally follow will be there'll be 4 key milestones in it if you look at a very macro level. First of all, they'll want to centralise the function, and they'll get economies of scale as a result of that. They'll then typically want to consolidate their ERP from maybe, in some cases, hundreds down to a handful, sometimes a dozen, down to maybe 1 or 2. They'll then look to standardise the process that flows over that ERP, standardise it so they have an accepted process and then one other kind of deviant process. They'll then want to automate that process as much as possible. And every time you go from one milestone to the next, you'll see huge benefit when it comes to cost, control, visibility, compliance, etc. So what we've done at sharedserviceslink.com is we've built something called the AP metrics, and just leading up to the AP metrics, this is some information that you just need to factor in when looking at the AP metrics. We find generally that purchase to pay is ostensibly it's a straightforward function to be sorting out, and this is why I think some people don't understand why there are very kind of detailed changes that need to take place in purchase to pay to really see the difference. However, when you kind of start peeling back the onion, you can actually see that the purchase to pay process is complicated, and it's complicated for these reasons. First of all, if you look at this process flow diagram first, this is the purchase to pay cycle with the little trolley representing that a procurement person is searching for goods in the catalogue. They're looking at the preferred supplier list, they're raising a requisition, they're raising a purchase order, etc. And you can see here that this purchase to pay transaction is actually a good transaction. It started life in a good and compliant way, all the way through to the supplier doing what they need to do, somebody in the factory checking in the goods, and then the invoice arriving in the green box in the accounts payable department and being processed. So this is what you would classify as it's not a bad process flow as it started life with a purchase order. However, if you can see here, there are over 20 steps in this process flow. So just bear that in mind. In addition to that, not only do you have 20 steps, but you're going cross-function, so procurement, business unit, accounts payable, so that's the blue, the purple, and the green boxes. But in addition to that, you're going cross-company. The life cycle of this transaction is actually going across to another company, so in this case, the supplier. So factor all of that in, and what you've got is multiple steps in a process flow, which means multiple opportunities for error, multiple opportunities for extended time, multiple opportunities for cost. You've also got lots of people involved in this, so you've got to be educating all the people each time in this process flow as to what they need to do to comply with good behaviour, which will end up in a nice, clean transaction. In addition to that, you add on another layer of complexity. If you think about all the invoices that you're currently processing now, so let's call it 500,000 invoices, and chances are you've actually got a supplier base of maybe 10 or 20,000 suppliers. So if I just go back to that slide one more time, this happens maybe 500,000 times a year, and as far as the orange box is concerned, that can actually be associated with maybe 20,000 customers. So what you've got here is actually a huge change management program with lots of stakeholders that need to be communicated with, and it becomes fiddly. So what's my point? My point is that when people say automate purchase to pay, it's not that straightforward, and there isn't a silver, like a kind of a silver bullet, a single bullet that's going to, or a magic bullet that's going to just cure all of your problems, address all of your issues. You can see here in this matrix that you've got a number of technology solutions down the left-hand side, EDI, catalogs, supplier portals, etc. And then along the top, you've got the actual end-to-end process flow steps from end to end, and then the procurement step, the invoice delivery step, etc. And the final box on the top right, you've got the different types of suppliers. So to accommodate all of those different ingredients, is there a single solution that can accommodate all of those different suppliers, all of those different invoice types, right the way from the birth of that transaction to the death of that transaction in payments? And the answer is no. So it becomes this matrix which is complicated, and you have all of these different technologies which need to liaise with each other, and you also need to make sure that from a deployment perspective you're rolling them out in a roadmap that serves you. So bearing that in mind, let's have a look at the study. We were asking some questions, and I just wanted to understand what the profile was of all the people that were in the recipients of this particular participants in the survey. First of all, my question was, how many invoices do you process per annum? 58% of respondents processed over 200,000 invoices. So we had relatively large-scale organisations participating in this study. Is your accounts payable centralised in a shared services organisation? Over 75% of the respondents said yes, so 77% of the respondents did have shared services, and the others you can pretty much vouch that they either had they had centralised accounts payable organisations and were at least looking to move to shared services organisations, or if they didn't at all, then they would have been looking at shared services as a viable option for them. What ERP do you run on? 46% of respondents were running off SAP. Normally in Europe, this is a European program that we ran. Normally in Europe, we see that figure in the mid-60s, so 46% running off SAP for this particular program was quite low. How many suppliers do you receive 100% of your invoice volumes from? 30% of respondents have over 10,000 suppliers, and you can see there that we were actually including in this study an organisation that had over 100,000 suppliers to manage. Importantly, though, how many suppliers do you actually receive 80% of your invoices from? And this, I found this the data that came back from this question very encouraging. 35% of respondents receive 80% of invoices from less than 500 suppliers. I'll say that again. 35% of respondents, so a third of respondents, receive 80% in the majority of their invoices from less than 500 suppliers. That means when you take a program where you do have to involve your suppliers, which is most accounts payable programs do actually require some kind of communications effort to the suppliers. If you just want to make sure, if you want a quick win, if you identify where 80% of your invoices are coming from, you'll find out it's actually quite a small group of suppliers, and those clearly are the ones to start with. It makes a big project a kind of far more manageable and digestible project. I wanted to find out what technologies were being used within this sample base, and you can see here that the popular ones were scanning and OCR data capture technologies, workflow, and of course an ERP. Less popularly used were dynamic discounting and supply chain financing, and an observation looking at the kind of global adoption of dynamic discounting and supply chain financing is that these two kind of themes are much more widely used in North America than they are in Europe. However, what's going on in Europe in terms of our financial situation in Europe, it's meaning that a lot of companies are sitting on an awful lot of cash, and they're now thinking, how can we maximize the liquidity that we're currently sitting on? And so I personally see that there will be a big surge in supply chain financing, dynamic discounting over the next 12 months. So I think that graph will look quite different if we ask it in 12 months' time. Interestingly, I wanted to find out what is your number one driver for P2P improvement. Asking this question 2 years ago, control was absolutely key. Coming out of the recession and kind of at the tail end of the recession, a lot of organisations were just wanting to get visibility, they were wanting to get control, they wanted to have that immediate view of their liabilities. That was really a very key driver for them at the time. It's now gone back to the I would say a very kind of traditional driver in shared services, cost reduction. So cost reduction, according to this study, has come back to the number one spot. What are your top 3 signed off projects for the next 12 months? And we've got some interesting ones here. There's such a push to standardise the P2P process globally. And when I speak to most shared services organisations now, they're striving to have end-to-end process ownership and to align finance and procurement. E-invoicing is very topical in Europe right now. Okay, so that's a little bit of the background, bit of context there. Let's just take a moment before we move to questions to have a look at some of the effects. And what I talk about when I talk largely about effects is call them metrics, call them KPIs, but for the benefit of today's session, let's call them KPIs. A common KPI that is used within shared services is what is your productivity, and what we mean by that is how many invoices does one person process per annum. And typically when we're talking about kind of average performance according to organisations like Hackett or Aberdeen, they'll be looking at about 12 to 15,000 is an average. And if you want to be a kind of a top performing organisation in the top 10%, you'll have to be at 45,000, 50,000 invoices per head per annum. You can see here that 55% of respondents were coming in at less than 15,000 invoices per head per annum, and 38% over 20,000. So quite a kind of an even spread of performers there. What is your average cost per invoice? This is also a very chief KPI that's used within shared services organisations today. 35% of respondents averaged at more than €5. So obviously this is in euros. And 15% of respondents averaged at less than €1. When organisations want to get from €5 to €1 per invoice, that's when technology plays a massive role. Because the ceiling of savings that can be achieved without the deployment of various technologies is quite a low ceiling. You move into a completely different stratosphere when you start deploying technologies. Encouragingly, though, we do have evidence of a lot of organisations who have deployed technologies, they've streamlined their purchase-to-pay process, they've got a high first-time match rate, and they potentially have outsourcing somewhere in the mix, and they are coming in at less than $1 and less than €1 as far as their cost per invoice is concerned. What is your overall first-time match rate? First-time match rate is one of my favourite KPIs. It's because it really tells a very full story as to how healthy and clean and efficient your purchase-to-pay process is, how on board your procurement team is. And normally what we're looking at here for top performing is over 90%. 44% of respondents had a first-time match rate of less than 49%, and only 16% in the purple cheese came in at over 80%. What percentage of invoices do you pay to terms? And we've got 45% of respondents paying 80% of invoices to terms. Generally, as a rule, we do see that companies do want to pay their suppliers on time and according to terms. And that is important to them, really more than anything, to ensure that they keep their suppliers very much in business. And also, as far as touchless invoicing is concerned, what percentage of your invoices do you receive electronically, either by EDI, electronic invoicing networks, electronic ERS, or through P-card? 64% of respondents received 19% or less of invoices electronically. So still quite a way to go as far as that's concerned, with 16% receiving 50 to 69% electronically. What percentage of your invoices are touchless? And 8% of respondents see 40 to 69% of touchless processing. So it's a pyramid. There are organisations out there that are up in the kind of 40, 50, 60, 70. Some organisations in the 80% pure touchless processing, where they don't see that document at all. It's just a data stream coming into their environment. It's auto matching, just goes straight through to be posted for payment. How much time as a percentage of the total time per month does your accounts payable team spend answering supplier inquiries? This is quite key, because when you break down on an activity basis where your accounts payable team is spending their time, you'll actually see that a lot of them are just dealing with supplier inquiries. And when you look at technologies like supplier portals, for example, if you've got those up and running, so much of that stuff can be self-served, and you can just farm out that labour, as it were, that activity from your guys who you're paying for back to the suppliers who can do this stuff themselves. So 57% of respondents have their team spend 20 to nearly 40% of time on queries. So nearly 60% have their team spend between 20 and 40% of their time on supplier queries, which, again, if you have something like a supplier portal in place, the savings there are considerable. So let's have a quick look at the causes. So we've talked about the effects, i.e. the KPIs. Now let's look at behaviour, which in my view is what the causes are. So I wanted to find out how aligned accounts payable and procurement functions were within these organisations. The options were not aligned, but we have the intention to change it. Partially aligned in the red cheese, aligned on most things in the green, absolutely aligned. 37% of respondents are absolutely aligned or aligned on most things. I took a lot of kind of courage, if you will, or joy from this particular slide. Reason being, there was one option which was not aligned, and we have no intention to change this, and nobody ticked that button. The general trend is that everybody is moving in the same direction. They realise that the accounts payable function will only be as good as the support that's provided by procurement, and therefore procurement has to be engaged and needs to be aligned. So there is a big shift from going from a siloed operating in towers mentality to an end-to-end approach, and it's having a huge impact on performance. How do you charge your business units for the services that accounts payable renders? This is an interesting one. You can see here that only 23% of respondents didn't charge at all, and that's quite encouraging. Had I asked that question about 2 years ago, I can pretty much vouch that 23% would have been much greater. 36% respondents charge based on activity-based costing. Why is this so important? If you charge based on activity, and you charge, for example, $30 for a bad non-PO invoice and say $4 or $5 for a good invoice, you are going to see a huge shift in the behaviour of your business units, because they will have transparency of their figures, and then they'll also realise the consequence of their bad, if I may call it, bad behaviour on the business. And all you're doing is shining a light on how much that bad behaviour is costing the business, and you'll see as a direct result of that behaviour will change. The downside with activity-based costing mechanism, it is administrative to manage, but I think once you've got it in place, it's up and running, you will see the results of it quickly. I think also just bear in mind, from a charging perspective, shared services is a business within a business, and therefore it should really have the kind of the characteristics of any typical commercial business. And one principle of a business is that they charge. from a customer perspective, if you think about when you get something for free, what value do you attach to that, and how much kind of skin in the game do you give to that particular service or product? So offering something for free, again, just from my perspective, I find it hard to compute, and sometimes I don't understand why some shared services organisations don't charge for their services. And I think this is a general kind of mood that seems to be present within the shared services market. Do you have a purchase to pay owner or process leader within your business? Really encouragingly, 54% of respondents do. And I think this is great. Again, had I asked that question 2 or so years ago, the term purchase to pay owner or purchase to pay leader was very, very new a couple of years ago. 4 years ago, it pretty much didn't exist. So this is something that's very encouraging and is very, very much on the upward trend. Also, do you share league tables? Because if just casting your mind back to the complexities of purchase to pay, we've got multiple steps, we've got multiple functions, multiple companies involved, and each time that's for 500,000, a million transactions. So data is really important for stuff like this, to see where there's a bottleneck and who's doing stuff right and who's not doing stuff right. So data around that and visibility around that is key. And then sharing the results and that data to key stakeholders, again, is absolutely fundamental. It means that people can respond really quickly as to change their behaviour. So do you share league tables? Just over a quarter do. And they also make sure that senior management have full visibility of this. 5% do, but they don't share it with senior management, and 68% said no. Lots of information there, and I know that Lynn will be getting a copy of these slides afterwards to be sending out to you should you want a copy. And now I'd like to put some of the questions to Joe, please. Joe, have we got you on the line?
Yes, indeed.
So obviously quite a lot of information there. Was there anything within the kind of the summary of that study that surprises you?
Well, first, before I answer that, I want to thank you for such great, concise data that you presented. I can't wait to see the four conclusions that you come up with. But yeah, actually, there are some things that kind of surprised me there. As you know, we have an online application that does a couple of different things for our clients. At the center of which is we're helping clients connect with their suppliers, helping them manage the connections between them and their vendors and supplier populations. What kind of struck me was we get a lot of requests from our customers in regards to controls, 1099s, compliance, like making sure all suppliers are outreached to, et cetera, et cetera. And to see that there's movement going back towards cost reduction from having it be compliant or control-driven is kind of surprising to me. In many respects, I think that while people walk the tightrope of AP, we are kind of like a safety net for them. At least that's how it's been described to me once before. And yeah, I get a lot more questions around controls and compliance on 1099s and not paying fines and stuff like that. So that was interesting to me.
Quite a surprise, yeah. No, I shared your kind of surprise when that kind of bubbled up as in the primary spot, because we haven't seen that one for a while. Also, I kind of talked about some of the key projects that were signed off for 2012. So we had stuff like e-invoicing projects. We had standardizing purchase to pay. How does that kind of chart, if you can kind of remind yourself of it, how does that resonate with what you're seeing amongst your kind of prospect and customer base at Lavante?
Well, that's a great question. Actually, there's 2 charts that you put up there that I kind of, in my mind, sort of married together. The first one was, I don't have it exactly in my head, but I believe it said something like how many suppliers do you receive like 80% of your invoices from, and it was like the majority is, or the number one answer was less than 500 suppliers or something like that. We get a lot of that as well. We see that, and maybe not 500, maybe more like 1,000 or so is where the sweet spot is for people getting most of their spend done. What's interesting is I married that with what are your top 3 signed off projects. I married those 2 issues together because the idea, one of your things was managing low volume suppliers, and what we realized between, we connect suppliers with clients with all their suppliers, not just the top 500 or 1,000. And what we find, since we have a function that can identify and recover lost revenue, so we actually have a recovery audit product that bakes in, we see that there's a lot of errors that are missing from the lower ranks of suppliers. So managing the low volume suppliers is something that we are actually hired to do. So having that be where not many people are asking to do that on your chart was kind of interesting as well. The idea of getting a portal and managing low suppliers, and I only can speculate. I think maybe that's because people look at that as like expensive, not cost containing, but cost intensive. Whereas the top 3 were something like T&E and e-invoicing, things that are cost containing. I don't know, it's interesting to me. I sort of can connect the managing low volume suppliers in the vendor portal together to collecting those lost money. So in my mind, that becomes a cost savings tool more so than anything.
And what would your what would your advice be to, say, like the 30 people that actually participated in this, who may have been kind of overlooking a nice kind of money-making, if you will, opportunity?
Well, my advice, and I certainly don't want it to be self-serving, but would be to do just like you said, get a plan together and look at this as a process. Do not look at it as a project. That is to say, drive as much cost as you can out of your systems. Make sure that you have accountability and visibility. And just, the old question, how do you eat an elephant? The answer is one bite at a time, piece by piece by piece. You can use firms like ours to sort of fast forward the ability to communicate with all suppliers at once. I mean, I think it's great. A lot of our clients do, but if it's not for these 30 people, that's fine. But I would say keep at it, because the deeper you dig, reaching out to the lower volume suppliers, you're going to find that many of them are related to the large ones, parent subsidiary type stuff. And as you dig deeper, you're going to find that there's a fair amount of money that's due you as well. So I would say just keep at it, drive your costs down, and get the correct KPIs and manage it by the numbers.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Joe. I think that takes us really nicely into the 4 truths. So, just to remind you where we're at in this story, we conducted a study. The intention of that study was to really understand what the connection was between behavior and outcome, cause and effect. So what we discovered when we were doing this particular study is that there was very much a connection between the causes and effects within purchase to pay. And we boiled these kind of observations, if you will, down to 4 truths. So the first truth is the following. So, how aligned are your accounts payable and procurement functions? You can see here we've got 2 bars, the blue bar and the red bar. So what we've got here is a representation of KPIs, first time match rates down the bottom, and payment on time rates, and also the deployment of enabling technologies, e-invoicing, scanning, OCR, data capture, supplier portals, PCOS workflow. And you can see an obvious trend. The blue bar is higher every single time without exception. The organizations that are absolutely aligned with AP and procurement, they have higher first-time match rates and payment on time rates, and a higher deployment of enabling technologies. So if you haven't already started working with procurement, or if you're procurement on the line, you haven't worked with AP, the message here is do so. It is incredibly powerful. And once the two departments or 2 activities or 2 functions are collaborated, you really will start seeing huge results as far as your KPIs are concerned, and also the deployment of enabling technologies. That takes us on to the second truth. The second truth is around charging. So we found that the shared services organisations that charge their business units for the services that they render have higher payment on time rates and, again, higher adoption of enabling technologies around workflow solutions, scanning and OCR and data capture, and electronic invoicing. The exception in this case is P-cards, and the justification for that is, especially in the United Kingdom, P-cards are very popular with government, and government shared services organisations typically don't charge their end users for the services that they render. So that is how I would explain that anomaly. But you can see here that if you charge for your services, chances are you'll have higher KPIs or better KPIs and a higher deployment of technologies. The third truth is the following. This one boils down to the existence of a purchase-to-pay owner or purchase-to-pay leader within the business. And again, you can see here pretty much all of the bars, with the exception of the deployment of scanning and OCR and data capture, are in favour of the blue bar. So, and the blue bar represents the organisations that do have either a purchase-to-pay owner or a leader within their business. So my point to you is, if you don't have somebody that owns the process end to end and is driving improvement, driving policy documentation, policing, having like a policing unit with like underneath them to help them police and improve, if you don't already have that within the organisation, it might be an idea to start looking at that. And the fourth and final truth, ladies and gentlemen, is the following. Does your company publish a league table on business units and their PO compliancy behaviour, their PO compliancy rates? So does your company publish a league table on your business units' activities, specifically regarding raising purchase orders, for example? And this is a nice one to end with, because in every single instance, those that do have a league table and they publish them have higher and better KPIs and a wider adoption of enabling technologies than those who don't. So again, if you are not currently gathering the data of how compliant your business units are, and if you're not kind of sharing that data with senior management and making it visible to your business units and having a league table, then maybe it might be time to start introducing that within your business and looking at what the results might be. So to take all of what we've discussed in the last 30 or so minutes and just to boil it down in a quick summary, purchase-to-pay process is multi-step, multi-department, and it's multi-company. And not only are there multi-parties involved, there are multi-parties involved hundreds of thousands of times for each transaction. It is absolutely therefore prone to error, to excess cost, time wastage, and general inefficiencies. So the management of it, without exception, has to be end-to-end, and it needs to be very, very tight, as automated as possible, and as transparent as possible, so people know immediately what the consequences are of their non-compliant behaviour. And our 4 truths that we found that has an impact on improving purchase to pay it's the following. They are the following: the alignment of finance and procurement. Number 2, charging for your services. Number 3, establishing a purchase to pay process owner. And number 4, to publish league tables. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to hand back to Lynn, who I think is taking some questions.
Very good. Thank you very much for the very thoughtful presentation. So we have an interesting array of questions. First, referring back to I think your challenges slide and your alignment slide, Susie, is what are the key challenges that you see that are hindering the alignment between AP and procurement? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I do. It's quite interesting because having sold electronic invoicing technology and going into lots of multinationals, you do start between 2002 and 2007, you start kind of picking up things. And one key observation that I would make when I was going into these organizations, and really it was one kind of factor that compelled me to set up this community, was that I would be meeting accounts payable and the finance team for the very first time, and beforehand I would have insisted that procurement also be in the meeting room, and it would also be the first time that accounts payable had met procurement. So it was kind of handshaking all round, and I've heard your name, but I've not met you. So and I would be standing there just surprised that this was the first time that accounts payable and procurement had met. And then what would ensue was a meeting where you had these two departments coming at a single activity or a single kind of process flow with such a different set of eyes. So I think there are many reasons why there have been challenges to align finance and procurement. First of all, they have been disparate parts within the organisation historically. Second of all, accounts payable has always, in my opinion, felt like the poor relation, and has kind of felt a bit like a second-class citizen, having to pick up the mess that their more kind of glorious cousins in procurement have kind of created for them. So there was almost a kind of a resentment dynamic within that relationship as well. On top of that, I think historically procurement looked at finance as a kind of a after the event kind of function, there to kind of deal with the mess, there to kind of deal with transactions, deal with data, not really adding any value to the organisation. Whereas procurement saw themselves as much more strategic, much more value adding, and actually having quite a considerable impact on the bottom line. So I think once these different characteristics have been put to one side, and actually when the two parties realise that if you work together, you can really move from quite a mediocre operation into a top-performing, first-class operation. Once you realise that is achievable because of alignment between finance and procurement, all of that resentment, that baggage, those egos, all goes. And you've got this kind of very nice relationship that comes together. And what we're seeing now in some shared services organisations, we're actually seeing what's still kind of called the accounts payable function within some shared services centres being run by somebody who has historically been in procurement, and actually having a chief kind of finance person involved in procurement now. So like a cross-fertilisation of roles, so that there really is this more common mindset between finance and procurement.
Okay, that actually sort of leads into one of the other questions here that deals with alignment, specifically about if you don't have a proper alignment between AP and procurement. Considering a vendor portal, how can you really make that work, and how does that process work out? What are some of these solutions around getting a supplier portal working or moving? And Joe, I think that could be shared between both you and Joe on that. So,
Joe,
your thoughts first. Do
you want to take that one first?
Yeah, sure. Interesting question. We actually did a study on this a while back where we were asking people how many people were looking to actually implement some sort of supplier portal or some supplier portal like enablement. And I think we found it was like 8% of companies were going to do it. But then we asked how many people wanted to do it, and it was in the 70s, like 76 or something like that. And a lot of the issues were everyone wished there was like a sort of a light version so they can kind of crawl, walk, run into it, because doing a supplier portal that had onboarding and managing of tax information was, where does it start? Where does it stop? Do you get contracts? Do you get, how much do you take on? And ultimately, there were so many enterprise hands reaching out for more and more information that it sort of got paralyzed. So we saw that before, and I think what the conclusion of our study was you can just get started. We had a couple consultants that expressed ways to just get started, even if you're just, treat it like a process, not a project. How do you open up a channel to your suppliers where on an ongoing basis you collect information, and then 6 months from now, if you open it up and say, okay, now we want to collect legal information, now contract information, now special pricing information, it's like, great, just ask that now that you have established all the contacts. So that's ultimately how I would answer it, because that's what we saw in our survey.
And I think just to add on to that, I think I think if accounts payable doesn't actually have the buy-in from procurement and they do want to get going with a supplier portal program, for example, I think once you start, it's a little bit more high risk than if you've got procurement absolutely on board and aligned. Of course it is. It's going to be. However, if you start making gains within areas which have historically impacted procurement, and then you can demonstrate to procurement, look, this is what the supplier portal is doing for procurement, this is what it's doing for you guys, don't you think now is a good time to really buy into this so we can really get going with it? So I think that could be an effective way to actually educate procurement on how stuff relating to accounts payable can actually serve them.
Another one, sort of, again, dealing with the supplier portal area, is if you have thousands and thousands of active suppliers and you need to reach out to each one of them, it's almost, this person has said, how is it possible to do that? Manual processes, just keeping the files up to date, sort of preclude reaching out to everyone, and if it needs be, if the benefits outweigh the problems in doing the outreach, how can I possibly manage that process? So, do you have any thoughts on that, Susie or Joe?
Well, I mean, companies are doing it. That's the thing, isn't it? I mean, this is not kind of pioneering stuff. This is stuff that's been around, and companies are now really getting their teeth into it. And it's not uncommon. Shared services organisations that have high volumes of invoices, they're going to have 10,000, 20,000 suppliers, and they're going to have a tail, of the low volume, maybe low value suppliers as well. I suppose as an organisation, you just need to determine how many of those suppliers are you going to have in scope for the project, and based on how many suppliers, what does that communication program look like? How does the support for that technology, what does that look like? What's the business case for that scope look like? So lots of kind of questions to ask, but I think the nuts and bolts of it is that there are shared services organisations out there with high volumes of suppliers tuned into a supplier portal, and the essence of a supplier portal is that you do farm out the work. So, stuff like communicating with them so that they come on board. Really, if you can, that should be done in conjunction with the service provider that you tune in with, as far as the supplier portal functionality is concerned. Most of that is done electronically. You just need to make sure that the data that is your supplier, your vendor master database, that has all the email addresses on it for the communications program. You just need to make sure that that's all nice and clean. That is quite a fundamental best practice that you need to have in place. But once they're actually logged on, they should be able to administer a lot of the support themselves. That's the idea of a supplier portal. So I think if you are looking at supplier portals, just need to figure out exactly what the business case looks like, what's in scope, what kind of functionality you're looking for, and then taking it from there. But take comfort from the fact that this stuff does work, and there are big, hairy organisations with tens of thousands of suppliers using supplier portals just for that purpose.
And Joe, do you have anything to add to that?
I would suggest that it's just a lot of work. I mean, the question of how do you reach out to tens of thousands of suppliers if you're a corporation, it is a lot of work. I mean, one of the things we're hired to do is to do that work. And I tell you, whoever has an idea to do it easy, let me know, because I sure could use the help. It is very labor intensive. It's very technologically challenging. It's you could have a vendor portal and you could send out invitations, and you find out you do have bad or not clean data, like Susie suggests, and you have 4 to 5% of your suppliers show up, maybe 8 to 10, and your ROI is dependent upon how many people actually comply and use the application. So It is a very challenging thing to reach out to all suppliers. When you look at some of the stats that Susie put out there, which I thought were brilliant, about how much it costs to process an invoice, I mean, most AP people are paid to process invoices and to manage suppliers. Although, many AP groups are actually tasked with managing the vendor file, the actual supplier file. I think we saw one survey that was like 70% of companies, or Fortune 1000 companies, the vendor files managed in AP, but yet the AP prime directive is to get the invoices inexpensive and on time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very challenging question, a great question, and a very challenging dilemma.
Okay. Well, Susie, I think that we've sort of run to the end of the hour. I want to thank Susie for your time and your really, as I said before, very thoughtful and insightful presentation, and Joe for your insights into a lot of the processes and the numbers that Susie presented. I want to thank everybody for spending the hour with us. We will be sending out, as I said before, a link to the recording and the slides to everybody who is on the line. And we will send you a notice when we have the second in the series of Hot Topics in AP. So thank you so much.